This podcast is presented by Pass Books and Cat Island Coffee House, Jasmine's local bookseller and coffee house in Pass Christian.
Pour yourself a sweet tea, pull up a lawn chair, and turn the page with us. You're listening to Right On Mississippi, a podcast taking you inside the minds of America's most treasured wordsmiths. Hosted by Ebony Lumumba and brought to you by the Mississippi Book Festival, the South's literary lawn party. Chapter 5, Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward is an American novelist and an associate professor of English at Tulane University. She took that appointment in 2014. Ward was born in Berkeley, California. However, at the age of 3, her family relocated to Delisle, Mississippi, so she is a true Mississippian. Jesmyn won the National Book Award in 2011 for her second novel, Salvage the Bones, and she won another National Book Award for her third novel, Sing Unburied Sing. She is the first woman to win 2 National Book Awards for fiction. How impressive. She's also a former Grisham writer in residence from the University of Mississippi. She was there from 2010 to 2011. And in 2017, she was the recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. She is wonderfully decorated and quintessentially Mississippi. Full disclosure, totally starstruck today talking with Jesmyn Ward. She is a Mississippi daughter like myself, and I feel like I've just been orbiting your cosmos for the last maybe like 8 to 10 years, just kind of not close enough, but just close enough to feel your magic.
Well, thank you.
No, you're welcome. I'm 100% true. So, I try to have this conversation where it's not like any of the other interviews that you do where folks want to know about your process, and you do a lot of very heavy discourse about what has motivated you to become a writer and sort of the themes of your work. But I kind of want to know a little bit of the things that make you tick that are a lot lighter. Like, we're all reading you right now. So who are you reading?
I actually have been reading, so I owe several people blurbs for their work. And I basically, like when I'm on tour, it's so difficult for me to travel and, teach and, take care of my kids and, just deal with everything else that's going on in my life, that I find that when I'm on tour, that a lot of times it's so stressful for me that I feel like I can't read anything heavy that I don't have to read, right? So I've constantly been reading nonfiction for the next novel that I'm working on because I've been researching, right? Trying to research different, like basically trying to research the slave trade.
Oh, wow. Talk about heavy reading.
Yeah, the domestic slave trade, exactly. And so I was reading a lot of sort of lighter things in my free time. A lot of YA because I'm going to attempt to write middle grade / YA books. I was reading a lot of middle grade YA books. Oh, girl,
we are ready for that.
Yeah. But then recently I owe several people blurbs. So I've been reading a lot of my peers' work. Mm-hmm. I started with Kiese Lehman's Heavy, which is just amazing.
Yep, agreed.
So I read him a few weeks ago. I read Heavy. And then I read one of my friends, Christian Kiefer. He's coming out with a book. It's called Phantoms. Really great. Set in California. It has to do with like the Japanese internment camps, and it's set like right after the end of World War II. Yeah. And then what else have I read? Oh, and then I read so Mitchell Jackson. I share an editor actually. Kiese and Mitchell Jackson actually share an editor, Catherine Belden.
Okay.
And so Mitchell is her editor too. And so, Mitchell is her client too. Mm-hmm. And Mitchell is coming out with a book called Survival Math, which is a memoir, which was, really like dense and complicated.
As memoirs typically are. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really great. And so that's the last thing that I read. And now I'm reading, Daniel Black sent me his manuscript. And so he is next on my list. So I'm going to read his his book I think will be coming out sometime next year too. So I'm trying to read his book so I can give him a blurb. So yeah, I've been reading lots of my friends because I'm trying to, spread the love. Yeah.
You get all the goods before we can get our hands on them. So that's enviable. Listen, you mentioned I'm also a mother and a writer and a college professor. So again, that's kind of me orbiting this cosmos that you have going on. But you mentioned balancing what you do and your art and your brilliance with taking care of children. And I immediately thought about Buchi Imacheda's quote, Nigerian writer Buchi Imacheda's quote, that she's a writer because of, not in spite of, her children. And so I wonder how motherhood inspires or impacts the work that you produce. How does it inform what we get to read from you?
That's a really interesting quote. I mean, which I hadn't encountered before. I mean, I think I understand that idea because in part I feel like, I was drawn to writing and to literature and to reading before I had children. But I think that, maybe one of the sort of driving factors in doing this kind of creative work and choosing to write about the people that I choose to write about is that I want to make a difference. Like, I want readers to come to my work to read about, the kind of people who, Black people, poor people, Southern people, and to, see beyond like the stereotypes they might have had about those people. I want them to feel for those people and to feel with them, right? And my hope is that, like, when readers finish my work, then when they go out into the world, when they see someone, who could have been who might be a character, or who could be a character in my fiction, that then they interact with that person differently. They feel for that person. They see that person as a complicated, complex human being. And I think that being a mother, perhaps, because we want our kids to live in a better world than the one that we live in, and so I think the kind of work that we do is hopefully working towards that, right? So I think, that, I don't know, that
it's something to think about.
Yeah, like the impulse to mother, I think can motivate your work differently. I also think that that Leonie and that Ma'am are richer characters, perhaps because I'm a mom. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that being a mother has, made me better aware of, of how mothers and women, about how complicated they are, and of how their roles, how we shouldn't have sort of, strict ideas about their roles, or,
oh gosh, yes.
I don't know, how they can be more than what we think they are, or what we think they should be. That's not very clear, but
no, for a mother, it's absolutely clear. This sort of ever evolving role that we've taken on. And I will tell you this, reading Where the Line Bleeds before I was a mother, and then reading it again after I was a mother, it affected me differently, the text. And so, really, I guess my understanding for Joshua Christoph, it just expanded, I think. So kind of what I hear you saying is you acknowledge humanity in a very different way once you have gestated a human and release them into the world. So that's powerful. Incidentally, when I taught Where the Line Bleeds, my students automatically connected to a character. I mean, instantaneously. And so we spent the class sessions talking more about their life experiences than the text, which I think is a credit to you. And it was really a powerful moment. So, I want you to know, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, but hear it again, that you sort of have encouraged these mostly young Black people, right, to see themselves in something so powerful and really to give some validity to their own stories.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. I mean, especially because I felt very young when I wrote my first novel, and now as an older, I guess, in ways I am more accomplished as a writer, and I've evolved as a writer. Like, looking back on especially my first novel, I feel like I cringe a little bit because I look at it and, the writer in me say, oh, you should have done this differently, and you could have done that differently, and maybe you should have made all these different choices. So, but it does my heart good to hear that feedback from you and to know that, the novel Where the Lamb Bleeds, it may not be perfect, but that it's still, the story is still finding people, and it's still meaning, it has meaning for readers. And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for that. We're talking a little bit about your process and what you seek to do with your writing, but I kind of want to know whether or not you have any particularly goofy writing habits, like things you have to have or do that we may not assign to the very sophisticated, well-read Jesmyn Ward. Give us a little bit that makes us just feel a little bit better about our messiness. You would not want, I'm sitting in the room that I write in right now. Yeah.
You would not want to enter this space because, there's nothing goofy about it. It's just like very disorganized and messy. And I have like a wall of boxes that I have not, that have like, I don't know.
What's in them? Who even knows? Yeah.
So, I'm not the most like organized and the neatest person as far as work. I don't have any rituals. I mean, when I drink a lot of hot tea, even though I live, we live in the hot South, but I still drink a lot of hot tea. So making tea does help me work. But I mean, other than that, I don't have any like particularly, I don't have my favorite pencils or pens or,
not superstitious.
Nothing superstitious. I just sort of make myself work. I will say this, and I've told this story before, so I apologize if you've already heard this.
No,
but one thing that I have to do when I'm writing is, I might still read some, nonfiction in order to research and if I'm like particularly hungry for language, then I read some poetry when I'm working on a rough draft of my work. But I actually try to avoid reading literary fiction while I'm writing my own literary fiction. Yeah, because I'm just afraid of being influenced, I guess, by other people, like by other people's styles and their form. And so I try to avoid it. So I read a lot of, I call it fluff. I read a lot of fluffy stuff.
What is the fluffy stuff?
Well, I read like fantasy. I read YA. I read romance. I read, I just read stuff, I read work that
has really fun cover art.
It's really fun cover art where the stories are sort of like rollicking adventures where I don't have to work as a reader, right? So that there's no like difficult prose for me to figure my way through.
Unpack, yep. I'm with you.
Yeah, so that if anything, that's my like silly writing thing that I do is I just like read like DJ Older's this is another advanced review copy, but I think the book is out now, but he's coming out with like a middle grade series that's set in alternate reality where where dinosaurs live, right, with human beings, and they work together, and there's some magic in there too, and like the main characters are kids of color, and that was really fun.
I love that. I love the direction that YA and middle grade is going in terms of incorporating all of these new intersections for young people. And I'm very excited to hear that you are breaking into that.
I'm trying. I mean, I don't
think you're going to have to try very hard.
Literary. No. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like right now I feel the same way I did before I wrote Men We Reaped, when I'd never written a book-length, creative nonfiction piece of work before, right? So I had to figure out what was going on. And so I feel that way now too, right? I mean, I've never written a middle grade or YA book, so we'll see. But I really want to. I've wanted to write one for years and years and years and years. Ever since I became, thought of myself as a writer, I think that I wanted to write that kind of book, but I've just been putting it off for years. So I'm finally going to try it.
Yeah, the time is now. I think your timing couldn't be more impeccable. So you are quintessentially Mississippi. We are Mississippi sisters. And I think about when I travel, I feel like I'm taking Mississippi with me in ways that are positive and ways that are perhaps there's some negativity projected onto that as well once folks figure out where I'm from. But I want to know, what part of Mississippi do you feel goes everywhere with you? What does that look like for you?
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean,
it's pretty loaded.
I don't know. It's like my family, really. I think I take the people with me, my community, my family. That's the part that I really take with me everywhere. And I think that when people that I meet sort of have like these negative ideas about Mississippi or negative, kind of like, I don't know, preconceived notions about what it's like to be from here and what it's like to live here. I think that I immediately react and think about my family and about my community. And I think it makes me a bit defensive in some ways, right? Especially because I was, I don't know. I think that other people probably feel like this too, right? But I sort of feel like, Mississippi as a state as a whole, I feel like, okay, so it's just like my family, right? Like, so I can talk trash about my family.
But you better not.
But you can't. Yeah, you can't. Like, don't say anything about my people or else we're going to fight. So I don't know. I mean, although I can definitely, I tell you that story because, there's definitely that I know and perceive that is like, that's backwards about this state and that, I don't know, that there's definitely a lot of like room for improvement, and I acknowledge that. But I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult because, and I know this has been echoed before too. I mean, you love this place because this is where your family is from. This is where your community is from. This is home, right? But then it can also be a very frustrating place to represent and to live, right? Because this place can disappoint you so often.
So often. And I think that's part of what has kept me and my family here. That is, if there is going to be this change and progress, that we have to be a part of it. Do you, can you relate to that sort of sentiment?
I do. I mean, I fight with myself every day about making the decision, to move back here, to start a family here, to raise my kids here, because I wonder like whether or not this is the best place for all of, for me to do all of that, and so it's like, it's a constant struggle, but I do feel like I'm doing good work here and that it means something for me to be here, with my family, with my community, telling the stories that I do, using the small platform that I have to try to create good change, in this state and for the people that I love. So I don't know. I mean, right now it's worthwhile, and even though I struggle with it, I feel like it's good that I'm here. It's good that we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly feel that way. And I think there's a certain pride that I have when I'm able to share your work in a Mississippi classroom and then let those young people know your background, that you are from here and this is your family and this is your community. I think that's something that within our generation, I didn't hear a whole lot of. There were Mississippi writers, but they didn't look like us. So I wasn't able to kind of attach my reality. So it's absolutely critical that you've decided to be here. We're grateful for your presence. I want to talk maybe just a little bit about your work as a teacher, because I don't know that you get the chance to really talk about your classroom as much on, maybe on the national level. But tell me a little bit about how your students maybe inspire your work, how you're inspired by them, and, if you run across the next best thing in writing in your classroom.
I mean, I teach at Tulane, and there's definitely, I actually taught my last class for the semester just this past Wednesday. Yeah. And I told both of my classes, I teach an intro to creative writing course and an advanced fiction workshop. And I told both of my classes, that there was no lack of talent, in those courses. And I meant it. And then I always, so then I also told them that, there's no lack of talent here. It's just that, you have to take what you learned in this classroom and carry it with you outside of the classroom. And if this is something that you really want, for yourself and in your life, you have to fight for it.
Yeah.
You have to commit to it. So yeah, I mean, I feel like every semester I meet groups of students, who, are very talented and whose work is really promising, and and who I would love to see join the conversation, of literature one day and to publish. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's just the question is, will they continue, right? Is this something that they will actually, try to be successful in? I don't know. I always, in my classes, I always try to make them feel safe and make the classroom environment feel supportive. And because I feel like, if this is something that they really want to do, that they're going to hear from many people around them that it's impossible, that this is something that they'll never be able to accomplish, right? And that the odds are against them. And while, that is true, right? The odds are against them. It's very difficult to, to successfully publish. But my job is not, I feel like my job is not to discourage them, that my job is to encourage them. My job is to be one of those people who says, well, actually, it is possible and you can do it. And
you're the living, breathing example of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Make a choice and take a step and, begin to walk down this road that might one day lead you, to being a published writer.
I love that. It's probably the wrong time of year for me to even have asked that question, the end of the semester pep talk, when you got grading and finals and that sort of thing. I can certainly relate. I'm also, interested in this sort of evolution of writing and maybe how it affects you and the way that you teach creative writing. I was in my first year of doctoral coursework when you were the Grisham fellow at University of Mississippi. And so I kind of got to hear from your students were my cohort.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got to hear kind of what was going on in the classroom. And I was so intrigued by it, and not being a creative writer, really intimidated also to kind of broach that genre of writing. But I appreciated a lot of the things that I heard just in the openness that you brought to the classroom. And I'm interested now, in this sort of evolution of writing where Twitter is a part, and social media has given an opportunity and maybe even taken away some opportunities for young writers. How does that affect your work and then maybe, your approach to teaching creative writing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how Twitter has become a tool for writers, and how it has allowed, especially poets, I think, to really build, to have access to an audience that perhaps they didn't have access to before that social media platform. I feel like I know many poets, many young, really good, great poets on Twitter who now have this reach that perhaps I don't think they had, I don't know, before the advent of Twitter. So I actually said that to my students in one of my classes this year. I said, you want to be aware that, if this is something, again, if this is something that you want to pursue, that if you have a large social media following, that it might sort of, I guess, grease the cogs, right?
Yeah.
Machine, and it might make it a bit easier for you, to, if you can demonstrate to publishing companies that here, I already have an audience, right? This is built in. These are people who purchased my book, right? That it might make it a bit easier. I don't know. It has become important.
Do you feel the need to have those conversations? I'm just thinking about Angie Thomas and her talking about this is kind of where The Hate U Give was born. She kind of put out a question on Twitter, and now we have this monstrosity of great writing production, and now it's a film. And it started there. So it just adds, I think, an element to your syllabus, I guess.
Oh, I didn't even realize that's how, I had no idea that was the origin story for that book. I don't know. I mean, I do think it's a conversation that we have to have. I'm not the savviest.
Yeah, neither am I.
person on Twitter. I don't have hundreds of thousands of followers. I, in some ways have gone about this in a really traditional way. Yeah. As far as like enrolling in MFA programs and really sort of working my way from the ground up in that way. Yeah. In writing my books and trying to reach people and, get readers. So I don't, yeah. So like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not the best at, I guess, at
Neither
at
am
working
I. I'm looking for
system.
tips here.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it all comes back. I'm not saying that this isn't the case for writers who are very successful on Twitter, right? But I feel like, it takes a lot of effort to be an active presence on Twitter, to be engaged, to interact with thousands and thousands of people on a social media platform. And I don't have the focus and
you've got children, so.
time. Yeah. And I have kids. Yeah. Like I don't have it in me to be, I think, as active as I could be on Twitter. So I'm not, and I really try to, I don't know, the time that I do have to focus, like I'm spending that time writing.
In the real world.
Because I'm not the fastest writer either. So, yeah, I have to like budget my time. And maybe that's a subject for another lecture, right? Like maybe, that could be something that or not lecture, but maybe that's a conversation that I could have with my students about, how you figure out how you're going to allocate your resources, right? How you figure out how you're going to allocate your time and your focus and, I don't know, your commitment.
Budgeting your writing time. Yeah, I'm going to steal that one. Taken. I'll give you a footnote. So you mentioned, like earlier in our conversation, this desire to make a difference and to ignite or maybe facilitate positive change, especially as we start to think about posterity, like our children, our students. And so, I wonder, specifically as a writer, what role you feel that Mississippi's writers have in sort of equitably crafting the narrative of this state, one that has been wrought with, the truth of the very true and sort of negative things in our past, but also kind of there are these spaces and gaps about what makes Mississippi a really beautiful space. So what role as a writer do you feel that you play in, I don't know, just making sure Mississippi is seen for it in its totality?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that's part of what we're doing or attempting to do as writers, right? Yeah. That we're trying to, create characters who are living experiences that are, that are complicated and that are complex, and our characters, I mean, not only do they, experience tragedy and pain and loss and grief, but they also experience joy and laughter and fulfillment, and they experience hope, right? And so just like the people who live here do, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we do. We have a very dark past that lives very clearly and heavily with us in our present, and I feel like that's one of the reasons that Mississippi creates so many great writers, and one of the reasons that our work is much of the work that Mississippi writers produce, that why it has such a lasting appeal, because it's not because we're really wrestling with the weighty weighty matters. I mean, there's a lot at stake in the work that we do.
Very true.
But I think that it's at the same time that we're wrestling with weighty matters. I mean, we're still reflecting a world that where light exists and where hope exists, and a world where community is important and where kindness is important and compassion is important. And so I don't know. I feel like that should be and it is, I think, reflected in our work. I don't know. Yeah, because I mean, I think that, part of the problem that Mississippians face in the outside world, and again, I guess this sort of echoes the earlier question that you asked me about, like Mississippi, is that people, I think that in the larger conversation in the nation, that people like to reduce us to our trauma.
Exactly.
And so as writers, as artists, as creatives, like we're pushing back against that, and we're saying no. Like, yes, we are reckoning with our trauma, but we're not just our trauma. We're more than that. We're complicated human beings living complicated lives, and so I think that's part of what we're doing in our work, and I think that has real value, and it can have. I hope that it can have real, repercussions on the outside. Outside
beyond literature
world.
And what we read. I think that's beautiful. It sort of echoes the sentiments you shared this summer in the New York Times article that I very much appreciate. That we've got some backwoods and backwards things happening, but we are a whole community. So there's some beauty and some righteousness as well. The last thing I'll ask you, and you can be just as candid and as brief as you like to be, is what is Mississippi to you?
That's like asking me to.
I know. It's what is your like, who's your mom? Like, what does she mean to you?
Like, exactly. Man, I don't even know if I can answer that question. I mean,
one word.
Mississippi. I don't know. It's everything.
Everything works.
Yeah.
Everything works. It is. It is everything. We encompass a little bit of what the rest of the country and perhaps the world deal with daily. It's all right here. And what my husband describes as the hatchet-shaped state. Well, Jesmyn, it has been such a joy just interacting with you, chatting with you. Thank you for taking a moment away from your family and your work to talk to the folks that listen to us. And I certainly hope to continue orbiting in your cosmos and seeing you again very soon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is Right On Mississippi.